substantial efforts on numerous occasions to compare Greek myths to the Gospels, and have done so quite effectively. In this regard, there are two major players whose morality and theology seem to have permeated the entirety of the New Testament. I might butcher these names. These include the Stoic Epictetus, and the Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria. It's obvious that John from the Gospels drew heavily on Philo, but have you taken any time to analyze the extent to which the morality of Epictetus might have influenced the Jesus story?
The only thing I can think of there which has struck me in the past is that in the kenosis hymn of Philippians 2, 6 through 11, it says that though he was in the form of God, he thought not equality with God a thing to be seized, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant or a slave, actually, doulos, I think it is, and so on, because of the mortal lot. Some have said this is kind of like Hercules, who becomes temporarily enslaved to do his labors and all that. In fact, some have thought that the Hercules myths were the basis of the kenosis hymn. I don't know, but it does point up that similarity. Well, this isn't one of the myths, but Epictetus, who was one of the great Stoics, not the founder, but pretty close. I think Zeno of Citium was the founder of Stoicism. Stoicism means porchism, a name for the porch that his disciples used to gather around. Well, Epictetus was actually a slave and very much abused. In fact, for some reason, his nasty old master had somebody grab his leg and start twisting it, and Epictetus said, if you keep on doing that, it's going to break, as if I'm going to be of no more use to you, and suddenly crack, and he says, told you so. And the point was the equanimity that Stoicism says whatever happens is happening to you in the providence of God, in order to knock the rough edges off. Every trial should be understood and welcomed as an opportunity to become more virtuous and to withdraw from things that are ultimately not important, like your health. I mean, it'd be better to be in good health, but even if you're not, there's something to learn from that. And the Logos fits into that, because the Stoics believed that the providence of God was the Logos, or reason of God, and that's what governed all happenings. Josephus says the Pharisees are kind of the Jewish Stoics, and they believed that everything was predestined except your response to events. Well, yeah, they would say that, I think, and Philo, of course, was big, real big on the Logos, the reason of God. He was a Greek-speaking Jew, and much influenced by Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics. And he said that this was the word that God spoke, so to speak, to create the world. He made the heavenly atom, very much like the Kabbalah, which, may have been contemporaneous. We don't know how far back that goes. And the heavenly atom was the prototype for creation. And there were a series of logoi that were gradually externalized to form the pattern of creation, and then the creation itself. He says that the Logos is the firstborn Son of God, the heavenly Adam, the heavenly high priest. Just about anything you can say about the pre-incarnate Christ, Philo said about the Logos, who was manifest in the form of the Genesis patriarchs. And now, how did he mean that? Were they incarnations? Christian scholars like James D.G. Dunn say, well, no, it was just in the Bible that character represents the Logos. It's all allegory. that could be, but I wouldn't be too sure that it's all merely allegory. But if it is, doesn't matter. I think he's right that the fourth evangelist must have known his Philo, so that's big, and Epictetus did too. And so there's a lot to that. Now, the Stoic ethic, the approach to life, which was very noble to the point where that became a popular religion, as Epicureanism did, sort of a similar philosophy in some ways. Stoicism said that the only thing that counts is virtue. Everything else is adiaphora, that is indifferent. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying possessions or whatever. They weren't ascetics. But the way to understand adversity is that it's not misfortune, it's fortune. Because this is an opportunity to grow, and spiritually and morally and all of that. They believe that that reality is, virtue is one, that you don't deserve the term virtuous until you are completely virtuous. Being halfway virtuous, I mean, you're probably going to have to go through that stage, but that's not the end in view. And so you're trying to become
Could it have something to do with sanctification?
Well, that's basically the idea, because Zeus, God, is trying to get you to be like him, conform to the Logos. And you find that throughout the epistles, and you find it in, like where it says, all things work together for good for those who love God. That seems kind of Stoic. The notion that whether I am abased or abound, I don't care either way. I've got Christ, and that's the only important thing. You really find it in James, strangely enough. Every good and perfect gift comes from above, the Father of lights, in whom there is no shadow of change. And he says, when misfortunes overtake you, my brethren, count it all joy. And it's obviously Stoicism. In 4th Maccabees, which sort of is a hanger-on to the Alexandrian canon, you would think you're reading straight Stoicism. It talks about the horrors of the martyrdom of the Maccabean brothers at the hands of Antiochus Epiphanes and his goons. And it says, and the issue, the lesson it draws is, these guys were able to endure this for the Jewish faith because they knew that reason must govern us, not emotions. And so he sees that as the point of the story, not unfairly. So there was a whole lot of Jewish interest. And remember, James also says, if you break one of the laws, you've broken the law. It doesn't. Maybe it's just the one, oh darn, I shouldn't have boiled that baby goat in goat's milk the other night. Leviticus forbids that. That seems kind of insignificant, but hey, it's part of the command of God. It doesn't matter if you see the validity of it. It's valid because God said it. And so they had the same idea. You can't be more or less righteous. You're just not righteous if you're part righteous. And so Stoicism was, and Epictetus was a great exponent of it. He wrote this great book called the Enchiridion, or the Handbook, and where he just has all kinds of wisdom people need today. Like he said, if you're envious and you see how so-and-so's rich, I'm not. Well, wait a second. Do you know what they did in order to get rich? Would you have been willing to do that? Because if not, stop envying them. And all kinds of neat stuff that he said. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, was a great Stoic. And he wrote this book, The Meditations. Everybody ought to read that. And my pastor in New Jersey used to quote it and so forth. Stoicism is important. With the Gospels, however, I think we're dealing with cynicism, capital C, founded by Antisthenes and Diogenes. Diogenes was the guy who hilariously would go around in the daytime with a lit lantern and say, "What the hell are you doing?" He says, "I'm looking for an honest man. Can you point me to one?" Oh, what a riot this guy was. There are loads of
like
it.
It's all darkness out here and you can't find it.
Yeah. Oh boy, it's so great. Once Alexander the Great had heard about him and said, "I got to see this guy." And so he finds him, and he's on a hillside, virtually naked, and he doesn't give a hoot who Alexander is. He's like the world emperor. And he says, "So this is Diogenes. I'm so impressed by you. Make any request and I'll grant it." And Diogenes said, "Okay, here's my request. Can you move over? You're standing in my sunlight." And Alexander said, "If I were not Alexander, I would be Diogenes." And all kinds of great stories. Somebody saw Diogenes begging from a statue and said, "What are you doing?" He says, I'm practicing being refused. It's gonna happen. Oh boy, somebody saw him coming out of a brothel, and he says, "You?" Go over there. He says, "Hey, look, the sunlight penetrates a latrine without being defiled. It's just like it's the sick who need the physician, not the healthy." One thing after another, and he said that. You don't really need anything. You don't need social conventions. You don't need family ties. They're just going to burden you. You don't need your possessions because they'll possess you. And look at the birds of the air. Do they sow or reap? No. But God provides for them, and so on and so on.
Wow.
So give it up, you'll be free. And so he either went around naked, like some of the Indian philosophers, or he wore just a loincloth. Or there's the cartoons where he's wearing a barrel. I guess he might have. And he's sort of the prototype of the Gnostic revealer, who would be on the lookout for people. I bet that guy's got the spark of the divine in him. I'll see what he has to say. So Diogenes said, "We don't need any of this stuff. Do squirrels have a hierarchy? Do they have a government? Do they need it? No, and neither do you." The goal was to live in accordance with nature by reason. And so they gave rise to the Stoics. And the big difference was the cynics said, if you possess the stuff, it will possess you. Get rid of it. And the Stoics said, well, that's going a bit far. I mean, you're still captive to these things because you're obsessed with them, whether you actually have them or not. I view having a car, a chariot, or whatever as ultimately indifferent. I'm not going to weep if I lose them, but I don't feel I have to get rid of it. That's obsessive. But the cynics said, yeah, you're just making excuses. If you can just as easily get rid of them, why don't you do it right now? But you won't, will you? And so they had this, they were very much alike, but they had that running debate. Jesus is depicted as much more like a cynic for obvious reasons. And almost everything Jesus says in the Gospels can be paralleled multiply from Stoics and cynics and the rabbis, interestingly. But it's hard to come up with anything that would really match Jesus' stance, whoever does not hate father and mother, etc., and give up all his possessions cannot be my disciple. Nobody else really is saying that but the cynics. And so that's one of the major views today of Jesus, that he was a cynic. I mean, he could have known about cynicism. There were Middle Eastern, there was Meleager of Gadara, the place where the demoniac was. And you have to wonder if that has something to do with cynicism, since the guy's naked. But at any rate, or John the Baptist is portrayed as much like a cynic. Oh, and the mission charge. When Jesus says, now, take nothing, but don't take any money, don't have a spare cloak, don't have a pouch, just a staff, no extras, no sandals. And then in a couple of, that I think it's Mark, Matthew and Luke say, okay, you can have a staff. What's going on? Well, the classic look of the Cynic apostles or philosophers was they had a cloak, a pouch, and a staff. And so this is an attempt to say we don't want you to get confused with the Cynics, which happened all the time. So there's a lot of this background stuff. Son of a gun, that's why he says this and that.